Alright, so Loki might have just broken all conventional means of power scaling in One Piece in one chapter, and I gotta say, I'm pretty hyped for it, honestly, but I do think that he might carry a dark revelation in the wake of his arrival too, so don't get too hyped. There's a good chance that Loki, I think, will become a demon. Now, honestly, I kind of think that he might need to for the story to still work going forward until Elbaf is just gonna end in like 8 chapters. Which I gotta say is sort of a personal problem. I'm actually kind of struggling with Loki's insane and very cool dragon form. Like, its scale and his powers in chapter 1174, pretty much insane. But before I get into all of that, I do want to give it some praise here too, because quite frankly, Oda is an absolute madman. Like, this is absolute peak One Piece. Let's not, talk around the bush here. Beat around the bush. Loki's dragon form is absolutely nuts. The dude is gigantic. I mean, titanic. What would you even call it? I think someone said 50 times bigger than Kaido. I mean, I don't know, scaling in One Piece gets weird, but the dude is gigantic. This thing makes Kaido's dragon form kind of look like a freaking toothpick, honestly. He's like Zunisha scale almost. Are you kidding me? I was expecting like at max 2 or 3 times the size of Loki, who's already titanic, but not this like cataclysmic level of huge. He makes giant Luffy in Gear 5 here look tiny, and Ragnar even smaller by comparison. I mean, look Ragnar next to regular Loki and then on the dragon. I just cannot believe the scale Oda chose for this dude. It kind of feels too big almost, right? You know what I mean? Like, how can Loki even maneuver around? But hey, I accidentally nailed it in my recent Loki Dragon hybrid form thumbnail. Totally got that one on my first try. Honestly, I just kind of went with black in that one because I thought it looked pretty gnarly, and hey, turns out we might have called it, though. Who knows, if we get the official coloring, it might be something else, but looks pretty black to me. The black scales are pretty sick, and they definitely kind of embody that Nidhogg role that he seems to be inhabiting, right? Which, while it's not confirmed because we don't get a fruit name yet, sneaky Oda, why not? We can all agree now that that's that, right? Especially now that we see the design isn't too far off the original Nidhogg dream monster we saw. Yeah? Alright, sick, cool. Now, I do think we need to get into the thing that I'm struggling to really wrap my head around here. I'll be honest, I was a little bit worried about making this specific video today because I really don't want to come across like the classic YouTube contrarian, just doing it for the game. As you know, I'm usually pretty positive on the channel, but sometimes I do have to address the unsavory answers too, and just, get some things a little bit in order in my own head too, because to be completely real with you, while I do think what I'm about to say is very crucial for the story, I personally would be very happy if there were some solution to the problem I'm having here. But for now, I have to address the gigantic dragon in the room. Loki needs to get possessed by Imu now, right? Right? Like, I just cannot see any world where Loki doesn't forcibly become a villain here because he is too big, too strong, and straight up breaks my entire understanding of the power structures in the series, which were already on like a little bit of a freaky, tightrope walk. What a weird word. Tightrope walk. Anyway, you know what I mean. So again, I don't want Loki to be evil, and clearly we know that he isn't a bad person by nature, which is great. Still very much on the Loki for Straw Hat train that I think I'm the only one on, but considering that he can destroy the Holy Knights is bigger than entire islands we've been to, and Imu was already trying to recruit Loki through Shamrock, I'm kind of starting to think that in the next few chapters we'll see our dear boy Loki become a bad man, not by choice, but by Domi Reversi. Thanks to little Imu dark magic. So why do I even think that this needs to happen from a story perspective? What weird juice am I drinking again that makes me go yes, this chapter proves that Loki shall become a mega villain, and don't get it twisted, I don't think it should happen. I think it might need to happen, because if it doesn't, Oda is like treading into some really, really murky waters for scales and just overall stakes in the series. Like, I think he knows what he's doing, but just, from this chapter and without knowing what the next chapter will be, especially with a week break in between, just kind of insane. All right, what do I mean by that? Well, let's just look at Loki, right? Like, he's gigantic beyond belief. We talked about this. He can control multiple elements, apparently, is an advanced Conqueror's Haki user, and has the crazy legendary hammer Ragnir, which is hailed as the insane legendary artifact creature type squirrel by the people of Elbaf. And Loki also seems to represent to me the giant black dragon in the middle of the mural, right? Which is this godlike figure able to rival and maybe even destroy the Hellflame Serpent from the First World. So again, do you realize just how powerful Oda is setting this up to be? Like, seriously, if the reason that the chapter title, The Strongest Thing in the World, is actually referring to Loki, like there's no shenanigans going on here, which we'll get to, right? But if it's the case, well, then the good guy team is so broken at this point, arguably too broken. Like, there's no tension if Loki is just straight up this busted and the clear solution to dealing with all the Holy Knight regeneration immortality shenanigans. Now, to be completely fair, since I do cover the official and we're pretty late to the party here as always, I've got the chance to read what other people think, and I do kind of agree with some stuff I've seen floating around online, which is that the title of the chapter is referring to the parents' love for their children. The strongest thing in the world, like Severus Snape style, is a parent's love for the child. Actually, it's Harry Potter, right? You get it. This is a classic Oda move, and we have seen it time and time again in the series, especially in the last couple of arcs as well, with Bonnie and Kuma, and Ripley, Scopper, and Colin, and then obviously Loki, Hajrudin, Harold, and Ida. So I personally like to think that this title of the chapter is a little bit more metaphorical and nuanced, and Oda being a little bit rage baity here, but regardless, you still can't deny that even without the title of the chapter, Loki is freaking busted, dude. And I kind of think that he's too busted to stay on the good side for very long, unless, like, Imu is pulling up some crazy other things that we haven't seen yet that suddenly, bring the power balance a little bit into the equilibrium once again. Because let's say that that doesn't happen and Loki is not Domi reversied or turned to the evil side somehow. Join me, right? What Oda is then essentially doing right now is handing the press to kill Holy Knight murder button to Loki. I guess maybe outside of Shamrock. Like, is Shamrock an equal to Shanks? And Shanks somehow maybe beat Loki in the past, but we don't really know if that actually was a real fight. Like, seriously, it kind of feels like there should be no threat in the One Piece world that can rival Loki in this form, which would mean that there's really no more stakes in One Piece, since Loki's practically this Gojo tier uber broken character. At least that's how he's introduced in this chapter. Oh, but Manu, surely Imu can defeat Loki, right? And yep, that would also be bad, because if this Loki isn't close to Imu's level, then I'm kind of seriously struggling to see how anyone is gonna defeat Imu at that rate, because Luffy is, I personally would think, unless this giant black Loki dragon is surprisingly weak, I don't think Luffy's anywhere close to that level in power. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's an angle that Oda could also take, just making Imu so beyond unbelievably powerful that even Luffy and Loki together in these crazy forms aren't capable of defeating them. But then what's the point, right? Like, Luffy should eventually be able to defeat Imu or Blackbeard or someone with the Abyss powers. So I think it's pretty clear that that's the direction that Oda's going with things, unless Luffy isn't even in his god form strong enough to kill Imu, kind of like how Joy Boy wasn't strong enough, and he might need something else, like something that can only be used once, maybe on Laugh Tale to defeat Imu, but still, you get what I'm saying, right? So by making Loki this broken, but then setting an even further bar ahead with Imu, it kind of starts to make the entire scale of power in One Piece that, I usually stay away from for a reason, a little bit more difficult to decipher than it already has been over the last couple of arcs. So to me, there are two paths really that this makes sense. Either Loki is not actually as powerful as we all think, and all the stuff we've seen, heard, and had explained to us is kind of hyperbolized, which would be kind of frustrating, or Loki becomes possessed and is instead a threat to the Straw Hats and the world, which I think would just make way more sense and also fix a lot of the stuff that, I'm sort of mentally struggling with keeping, in order right now. And on top of that, it might also help Luffy grow to that right level as well. Also, before we move on to the next section of the video, very random thought I just had. Was this the type of dragon that the Yuma slayed? Because that would make him so much more impressive than whatever we saw on like Punk Hazard, what Caesar cooked up. Anyways, next section. All right, so here's why I think that, Loki being turned is just the best outcome for everyone. You, me, the series, the whole lot. Even for Ghetto back there, probably. I don't know, he's dead. Loki is really sick as a character because he seems totally busted. He's giant, badass, feels unstoppable. I personally really vibe with his personality. I guess that's more subjective, but I kind of want all of that feeling to remain since it's the same stuff that, made me fall in love with Loki as a character to begin with. But I'm probably not alone at, originally thinking that he was just like maybe Luffy tier, not clearly way above everyone else on that island, but since it seems like Loki is just like totally freaking busted, it feels more like there will be some big pivot in Elbaf that we're moving towards right now. I do not think that Oda is going to just either drop the ball with Loki's hype or create a hero that's so broken it makes Luffy straight up feel weak. That's not good shonen writing, and I know Oda is not gonna do that. And that's why in Elbaf, where we've already seen a handful of crazy powerful characters be possessed and turn evil, Loki also becoming a Domi Reversi beast feels like the best answer here. And this would then allow for Loki to actually be this disgustingly broken character because everyone would just need to fight against him rather than alongside him, kind of like a parallel to oars on Thriller Bark maybe. And because of the nature of Domi Reversi, it would technically make him even stronger, since Imu's powers seem to buff characters like Zebek or the Giants to an even crazier level. Not to mention, we already know that Imu wants to recruit Loki anyways. I mean, we saw Gunko and Shamrock come to Elbaf originally with that exact goal. They wanted Loki amongst the Holy Knights just like his father. Imu's old motto, if you can't beat him, use him. But that didn't work out obviously, and when they realized he wasn't gonna play ball, the only option left was to kill him, which also didn't work. Makes me kind of think that Shamrock left him alive, to be honest. Like, it didn't feel like he was very particularly serious at that point anyways. And, he was like, once you're free, let's fight again. Like, Shamrock, maybe not that bad of a guy. And, still holding out for good guy Shamrock, as you can tell, like, still shilling for my man over here. But Imu's desire to flip or kill Loki makes a lot of sense, right? Since we saw just how rattled and spooked Imu was by Loki's ability to, pretty much one-shot heralds. It's a power that threatens Imu directly, and Imu is not the type of character that, would casually let someone like Loki that's a danger to themselves physically exist at all in any scenario. We've kind of seen Imu delete islands because someone saw them and torture the Davy clan because Zebek stepped on some of their flowers. Like, really, try and tell me that Imu's just gonna skedaddle out of there and not plot something crazy for removing Loki from the situation, as they have the biggest chance to do so right now. I mean, Loki was previously wounded while he was still wearing the shackles, right? And I kind of think that that's very important to acknowledge here, right? I don't think that Imu needs to possess Loki right now, right here. I think it's totally fine to retreat, circle back, and then during the actual final war, where Loki should be a massive part of it, right? Like, then possess Loki then. That might even work a little bit better to give the crew a false sense of security. We got the big guy coming with us, everything's gonna be good. Since they think that Loki was their ace in the whole weapon, only for Imu to flip him last minute and ruin everything, and suddenly Luffy needs to fight against Loki and Imu. Now that would also explain how and why Shanks had to stop Loki and bring him back to Elbaf, right? Think about it. To me, it kind of feels like, that Shanks was worried Imu would take control of Loki, so he brought him back and was like, sit down, you know, the Luffy pushing the zombie back into the grave scene, kind of like that, you know, like stay here and don't do anything stupid is kind of the vibe that I'm getting. Because let's be real, if Loki was left unchecked, he could spiral into a giant demon dragon destroying everything, and I don't think that Shanks could really afford that right now. Which again, ironically, is what I actually think is about to happen here. Loki didn't think about the consequences of fighting Emu, and it might backfire royally, and to be fair, Loki might not even realize how Domi Reverse is actually working, because as far as he's concerned, the pact that his dad made with Emu is what actually flipped him, not some other crazy power that was, you know, used against someone's will. These giants here are a new thing entirely. But seriously, to me, right now, at least until we see some more of Loki in action, which is gonna be important, and maybe learn his Devil Fruit's name, it kind of feels like this is what should happen. It absolutely boosts all of Emu's forces in the final war, because they'd have multiple island-destroying weapons, Uranus, Buster Call, Loki, Akainu probably, and it would really put the pressure on for the rest of the world, because Loki left unchecked would be like a nightmare scenario for the entire One Piece world, and that's the type of thing that Emu wants, and honestly, probably also kind of needs right now. Plus, of course, Loki becoming a demon would give a few key powerhouses a reason to enter the main story again. Shanks, Dragon, and Mihawk would have a great reason to enter the fray, since Luffy's gang would need their power to keep a Domi Reversied Loki in check as well. I personally hope that this could prevent the stakes from being shattered right here and give the crew a clear hurdle to overcome, and it'd probably be the perfect enemy for Luffy to work towards conquering next, right? Because Loki's been framed now as a mythical sun god tier deity sort of figure, and Luffy, as the real sun god, I still think, has been set up to foil Loki for the entire arc now. Both their backgrounds are very similar. They had top-tier mentors in their youth, they're both really strong, and clearly they are the reincarnations of the will and spirits of the first two One Piece worlds. They are the next era of what we see depicted on the mural and in the legends. At this point, I think there's no point arguing that these two characters are intertwined, and Luffy having to pick up the slack by liberating Loki would be a pretty good way to pay all of this setup off. Loki, of course, has apparently believed that he is the sun god this entire time, and even told us he would destroy the world. And at this point, in this form, I freaking believe it, man. Like, he's got absolute potential for it. So what better way to rally the people of Elbaf and finally convince Loki that Luffy is the man that he should follow than by having Luffy work towards defeating Loki and freeing him from Emu's control. But to be completely real with you, I kind of do struggle with the idea a little bit, because like, I don't get how Luffy would become strong enough to defeat Loki at this rate either, because the dude just seems like a character stronger than anyone else we've ever seen up to this point, at least getting serious, right? Like, I just assume he's lacking the contrived ability to defeat Emu that Luffy has, thanks to his Nika form and fruit. However, I also do think that there is another character that is being set up to liberate Loki in a slightly different, more lovey-dovey way, and that's my girl, Shirahoshi, who feels all but confirmed at this point to be Mosa, Loki's secret girlfriend that goes to another school up in Canada. In case you missed why I think that, Shirahoshi just sort of perfectly lines up with all the little subtle things we've gotten to know about Mosa, aka Shaggy. Roger called Shirahoshi Neptune's hairy daughter, which is a little bit rude, and then Harold doubles down on this in chapter 1167, where he also calls Shirahoshi Shaggy, or Mosa Mosa in Japanese, which is an onomatopoeia, like the, you know, it does the sound that hair makes, right? Combine that with Mosa revealing to Loki that she had a real bad experience with the Celestial Dragons, which, you know, would line up pretty well with how Shirahoshi was treated at the Reverie, and the fact that Harold and Neptune joked about their kids marrying in the future, I don't know, man. It's right there. As I said, it's really all but confirmed officially. Now, the reason I think that Shirahoshi might be better off saving Loki than, say, Luffy, is because there's starting to be a precedent for it in the story as well. Like, intense emotional connection to someone seems to be able to weaken, or at the very least temporarily even break, through Imu's possession or Domi Reversi. We saw that Zebek was able to hold back his transformation for a while through his care and love for his family. We saw Harold able to snap out of it very briefly once Loki had done enough damage because he truly loved his sons and country. And we've most recently, of course, seen Gunko, aka Princess Shuri, snap out of her possession in chapter 1174 thanks to, well, Brooke's loud mouth, basically. Apparently the love here can be one-sided too, since it's kind of clear that Shuri really does care for Brooke, but obviously Brooke has some more complicated feelings, or was trying to provoke Gunko, I don't know. Like, patricidal princess is a bit of a nasty comment to just throw out there, and I kinda love that Brooke just went there. All of that is to say that Mosa seems to be the only person that Loki has a real, deep, emotional attachment to at this point in the story. Mom's dead, the other mom's dead, dad's dead, and his brother and he aren't close at all, really. Pretty much he's got Ragnir and Mosa, and I don't think squirrel hammers are going to save his wayward soul from absolute darkness. But I might be wrong, I'm a big Ragnir fan, who knows. But in all seriousness, the voice of Mosa, aka Shirahoshi, actually might do it, and that would be a real cute, earnest moment. I'd kinda love for that to be how it goes down, because it's a nice reminder that holy powers, big punches, and Conqueror's Haki level 250, I don't know. Conqueror's Haki has been getting all types of weird. I do love that, but you know, like regular Conqueror's Haki here, and then we have Wi-Fi Haki and canceling out stuff, and it's been getting weird, like Abyssal Control Haki. Conqueror's Haki by itself has kind of like pushed out the other two at this point. But yeah, my point is, love is a really big power in One Piece too. I just talked about it in my Conqueror's Haki Sanji idea last week, and as I said earlier, that might be the point of this chapter's title, the strongest thing in the world being love, and that's what will eventually free Loki and also Gunko and maybe everyone else from Imu's possession. If you follow the channel somewhat regularly, you might remember a theory that I put out a while ago when we were still in the Rocks flashback and everything in God Valley, and how I thought it was so interesting that Oda suddenly put such an emphasis on the Kuja tribe and on, you know, Shaki and everything, and how it does seem like he's been setting up this, the big conflicts in the past might have been about love and romance, and like the more we learn in this arc, like Elbaf seems to be setting up a big reveal that maybe even the Void Century itself, that entire war, might have been over love or failed love or jealousy, something like that, and the same thing might repeat in the current world again. I mean, again, remember Imu staring creepily at Lily's image and all the crazy things, and we have obviously, you know, Lily being the Kuja and then Shaki, and now we have Boa Hancock with Luffy. So I'm just saying, it's a massive theme. Don't be surprised if it ends up playing a massive central role at the end and for the final war as well. Also, just to be clear, I'm not saying this will happen 100%. Watch me. This isn't a theory, really. It's just what my gut feeling is kind of telling me should happen based on what Oda has been setting up, laid out, and just generally been establishing throughout his world building, and all by loose power scaling that has me kind of scratching my head, and especially as a non-power scaler, kind of making me a little bit itchy. Speaking of which, it's probably time I get into that section of the video, because as I promised, I'm gonna take on the monumental and slightly ungrateful task of trying to wrap my head at this point around One Piece's power scaling, which I usually like to stay away from, as you know. So again, to be clear, I do not consider myself a power scaler, and I'm not going to be ripping planet level or 56 quintillion megatons of force arguments here. I'm just gonna go by what I know, words, and try to make sense for both you and me of what's going on and what Oda is probably thinking right now. After all, I do words pretty well. Like, one might even say I am the wordiest boy on One Piece YouTube, even. And when you really strip away the spreadsheets, the video essays that are all about math and facts, tier lists and midriffs or low dips or whatever the cool kids call them, One Piece doesn't, at the end of the day, really run on numbers, right? No, it'd be words, a whole lot of them really, with a bunch of narrative framing, sick titles, and a gawk worship of reputation that's constantly being overcome by the youth of today. The most important thing we actually have when it comes to power scaling in this story isn't even the feats of the pages sometimes. At best, we try and rank characters based on the way that other characters talk about them. And that happens at various points throughout the story, right? The way that the world reacts when someone walks into a room. One Piece is a story built on myth and portrayal, and I guess aura if you wanted to use that word. One Piece is a story built on myth and portrayal and aura, for lack of a better term, not clean mathematical ladders or like a clear scaling system. The bounty system is a great example, actually, in case you were thinking of that. It's pretty flawed, can't be used to gauge strength at all, and some of the most powerful characters don't even get scaled for inflation at first. I mean, Dorian Broggy, Brook, if you're using bounties as a metric for power, hey, get the heck out of here. Which brings us to why I feel like I should at least try and unravel the power scaling a little bit at this point in the story, because it might help me also, and hopefully you too, clear up some stuff I'm struggling with a little bit. So join me as I venture forth into the danger zone, and I am very excited to hear your thoughts and comments on this. So, what we've got now is Loki in an absurdly sized dragon form. He's capable of killing and destroying holy knights, and his wicked ice and lightning attacks seem capable of overriding immortality itself. Oh, and he's also an elite conqueror. That's not exactly strong side character of the arc energy here. Loki's got endgame mythic tier power. I hope we can agree is at least what the vibe is, right? And yet we're told that Shanks beat this man. We're supposed to believe that Shanks by himself stopped this. And sure, I can kind of accept that. Wi-Fi Hockey Man is the GOAT. He does things we've seen no one else in the story do. Need I remind you he's a one-shot kid, right? So if Shanks defeated a dragon-formed, holy knight destroying, immortality bypassing giant, then dude, I can't get it. Why is Emu still a threat again, right? Like seriously, why would he be plotting and scheming for so long? He should just straight up already be outscaling Emu if he's stronger than Loki. Or again, as we said earlier, Emu's power is just like literally untouchable, right? Or at the very least, that's what I was thinking when I started working on this video. But I don't know, I've kind of had a change of heart, I think, since I started to look at things through a new lens. I think it might be the kids who are wrong, because maybe, just maybe, we're misunderstanding how One Piece scales power entirely. Like, just for example, here's a huge misconception that Oda has just recently cleared up. About 2 years ago, if you asked anyone, right, including me, who was the strongest non-god character in One Piece, the answer would be pretty simple. Roger, Zebek, in some variation of that order, right? We were all quite confident that in their prime, the old generation were nearly these untouchable gods. Characters that really only people like Nika, Joy Boy, and Emu, right? People on that level ever could outscale. And we all loved pretending, again, including me, that God Valley was like the absolute peak display of power in the story. Prime Roger, Prime Whitebeard, Zebek, the freaky daddy, right? This was the stuff of actual legends, and we'd seen just how strong Rayleigh and Whitebeard were as old men, so their captains in their prime must have been like the greatest guys ever, right? Stronger than Luffy until the last few chapters. Well, not, because when you actually look at what we know, God Valley does not resemble the modern era in terms of power at all. We don't see a ton of Conqueror's Haki sky splitting everywhere. We don't hear dialogue about Haki transcending everything. What we see is obsession over devil fruits and like a lot of cuts during cool fights and off-screen victories, I guess, but mostly broken devil fruits and then like Garp just being the GOAT I guess. But in all seriousness, we do know that Zebek was hunting two very broken and important fruits. Kaido and Big Mom fought for the dragon fruit. Whitebeard's fruit was busted and inspired Kaido personally, and the strongest man of that entire era felt like the most absurd reality warping abilities in existence were what he needed in order to have a chance to take down Imu. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of across the board suggests something subtle but very important. That era may have been completely dominated by devil fruit supremacy and not exactly refined Haki mastery. Actually, I'd even go as far and say it's not really even an assumption, honestly. We know it because they all failed to defeat Imu, and only Roger and Garp, the big Haki boys, were able to even do anything and defeat Zebek. 40 years ago in One Piece, devil fruits were thought to be the most important thing, and then it only became clear that Haki was what truly mattered. Which is of course why we then see Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard with crazy devil fruits all go on and still become absolute Haki monsters themselves, because they needed it in order to be at the top. And don't get it twisted, Zebek was a terrifying man. He could destroy a gate of justice, which is not a small feat by definition. Those things are enormous and girthy, like a Reggie Steele, but he was still defeated by Roger and Garp together in a Domi Reversied form, and if Roger needed help at that stage, then that kind of only furthers my point, I think. He wasn't the mythic pirate king apex of the entire world that we retroactively imagine, at least not yet, right? Power scaling using God Valley is pretty much essentially pointless, I've kind of grown to accept, because everyone there was still very much starting out and climbing. So what, you might be saying, right? What does that even matter for me unraveling how power scaling works in One Piece as a whole? Well, I kind of feel like it matters a lot, because the next generation after those guys seem to have outdone the unsurpassable legends of the Silver Age of piracy. I mean, my man Rayleigh, the Dark King himself, openly admits that in his old age, his member doesn't work the way it used to, and that's why he uses Cialis. But what's more important is that he also states the current series Blackbeard would very much be able to defeat him. And that's not a throwaway line here. It's actually crucial to our own misunderstanding, and actually also Blackbeard, because he thought he couldn't take on Rayleigh at this point, or at least, you know, my misunderstanding sometimes of One Piece's overall power scaling setup, right? Oda is outright telling us that the ceiling was never the old guard to begin with. The mega team up on God Valley couldn't do an ounce of damage to Mu. I think it's much more like how if you ask any person who the best athlete in a sport is, they'll likely pick the strongest of their own era, right? Michael Jordan, Kobe, or LeBron. Shohei Ohtani, oh well, I mean, he just might be the best, but you get it. I'm personally more of a soccer person. So you might say Messi or Ronaldo, or I will say Thomas Müller. Anyways, history lays the foundation for modern, current power, and the next generation very quickly outscales the old just because, you know, people keep getting better and better at what they do. And a prime example of this is old Rayleigh, who can still stall an admiral. He can't defeat Kizaru, and I don't even think Prime Rayleigh would have actually been able to confidently take on Kizaru one-on-one and walk away as the winner. I'd probably give him the edge, but I think it's a lot closer than we all like to pretend, honestly. But Luffy in Gear 5 can easily now overwhelm Kizaru after only 2 years of training. Meanwhile, Kuzan and Akainu are portrayed as monstrous, but Blackbeard is still confidently the captain of this entire crew, which is about power first specifically, right? That's his entire concept. So it's very likely that Kuzan, of course, doesn't outscale Blackbeard either. Not to mention that we tend to use titles as a tier system, and that's kind of flawed as well. I think you know that as well, right? There's literally no valid reason to assume that Aokiji, Akainu, Kizaru, Fujitora, and Ryokugyu, Green Bull, right, are all equals just because they're all admirals. Like, they're like Kizaru is here, and then Green Bull is here, and then Aokiji's a bit here, and then Akainu is here. Like, no, we don't know. Similarly, there's no reason to assume that Sengoku is stronger than them because he was the fleet admiral. He got promoted, right? Like, titles don't mean power. Look at Buggy. And we can't keep pretending that just because X Yonko defeats Y Admiral, that all Yonko tier characters will outdo all Admiral tier characters, because those are titles and ranks and, stuff that people recognize them by, not power tiers. And right now, we're seeing a new power tier. The Gorosei are revealing their absurd powers. The Holy Knights aren't able to be killed by the Conqueror's Haki loophole, but suddenly, young Loki is casually bypassing immortality, something that Zebek, Roger, and Garp, and at some point Shanks, could not do. But the modern generation's Loki absolutely can. It's very clear that the story is escalating, right? We're in the final saga. Whatever that like the final saga is like another thing that Oda threw out there and we're all like gobbling it up. What does that even mean? I guess it's the arc towards the end of the story, but we don't even know what arcs are left, right? Will Wano and, Egghead actually count towards the final saga if we still have 5 arcs to go? I don't know, different discussion, different video. But it is very clear that ever since Wano, the story has been escalating, not only in stakes, but also just in raw power output we see from characters. I'm gonna be really dumb and say the most clippable thing, and I know I'm gonna get some hate for this, but I actually think that Roger realistically probably would get his ass beat by current Luffy. And I am so confident in that statement right now, because to be real with you, while certain characters of course can't confidently take on all of these in a one-on-one immediately right now, characters like Law, Kid, Zoro, and Luffy are so close already to the level of the old heads in their early 20s and teens. Like, this is always what has been the craziest thing about the entire new and worse generation, that many of them are so young and, maybe even while not yet overcoming the crazy feats of the previous generations, they're doing things very close to them at a much, much younger age, where all of these guys were still rookies when they were in their 20s. Like, Roger was not that scary in his 20s, I think we can all assume, and not as strong as Luffy is right now. Because the old generation wasn't the final benchmark that Oda was planning for to begin with, I think. They were the foundation that couldn't succeed. It's kind of classic anime logic that the new generation always surpasses the past one. Shanks better than Roger, Luffy better than Shanks, and who knows, maybe there will be someone after Luffy who will be stronger than Luffy. It's a classic thing, you know it from shonen, right? Which now actually leads me into trying to unravel the big point of the day. Did Shanks, the Golden Age Haki GOAT, defeat Loki, the spry youngster bigger than most countries we've been to in the entire story? There are really only 2 possibilities here. Either Shanks did actually defeat Loki in a clean, all-out dragon form brawl, or he did not. If he didn't, that changes a lot, because Shanks has already ended wars without ever lifting a finger. The man stepped into Marineford and the party went quiet. Maybe the same thing happened with Kaido, we don't know. And since we do know that Shanks saw Loki kill Herald and was the one responsible for bringing him back to Elbaf, it's entirely possible that whatever happened between him and Loki was more negotiation, timing, politics, or suppression, not raw dominance, whooping Loki's butt and then chaining him up and dragging him back to Elbaf. I can definitely see the situation being more of a, you Loki are too strong to be going out here doing reckless things. Imu will come for you. You have to go back to Elbaf, man. If you get turned into a monster, we're all gonna be screwed. And then Loki was like, well, fair enough, but I kinda hate you for doing this to me. But my personal power scaling nightmare is if Shanks actually did straight out defeat him, because then Shanks is just absurd. Because Dragon Loki is not just a big, strong giant, he's a really big, really strong giant that can override abyss powers and immortality. He destroys Holy Knights how I snap a Sakura-flavored Kit Kat. And if Loki can break them and override immortality hacks, that places him on an entire different level of busted that we have not yet seen in the story, including, yes, again, God Valley. So if Shanks actually beat that, then Shanks would just be 200% outscaling the Holy Knights, right? Like, I guess you could say maybe he needs some other power to override the immortality, and it's all about hacks, not power, but like, Shanks would be incredibly dominant in the world right now. Top 1 alive, not immortal, demon god type of power, right? Because if Shanks outscales Loki, and Loki so clearly outscales most of the Holy Knights, the uncomfortable question follows, does Shanks outscale Imu? And if he does, why hasn't he ended the story already? Well, to be clear, he totally could be stronger than Emu. His haki is comparable to Joy Boy's apparently. We hear this, according to the giant warrior pirates on Naked Islands. And also, to be fair, I don't think raw power is how you defeat Emu, and I also don't think that it's how Emu defeated Joy Boy. I think that Emu was probably cheating. He cheated. Cheating is the problem. Don't hate the player, hate the game, I guess. But that contradiction is the crack that I found in the entire power scaling logic. It's not accounting for hacks and absolute BS and just luck. Like, I mean, look at Luffy versus Enno. Him being a rubber guy was kind of what decided that fight, which are again crucial to my own mathematical statistics. Let's face it, man. One Piece does not operate on a vertical ladder where A is greater than B and B is greater than C. Being stronger doesn't equal automatic dominance. Luffy himself keeps reminding us of that. Pirates fight dirty, and fights end up being very unique depending on the power matchup. I think you're gonna have a lot more rock, paper, scissors situations in One Piece than we all like to admit. Especially the scissors situation. Never mind. If that's the case, the series would have ended at Alabasta or Skypiea, right? That's why strategy mattered so much more. Honestly, it should have ended in Arlong Park at that rate, dude. And don't even get me started on post-time skip where Luffy literally is never stronger than his main villain until he dies, loses 3 times, or is cheated into a win. I think we all really need to sit down, take a breath, and accept that One Piece often does not care about who the stronger fighter is. And that actually brings me to my next little conundrum. The titles of strongest are just all sorts of dumb. The world's strongest man, the world's strongest creature, the world's strongest swordsman, and the strongest thing in the world. What do those actually mean? Like, I'm asking seriously, what does that mean? How are all of those different? And none of them are Shanks? Like, no, that doesn't make sense based on everything we've seen, especially recently in the story. Whitebeard was the strongest man, but was he stronger than Kaido in every conceivable situation? Or was he only the strongest human male in his prime? Like, and since Kaido was an Oni, he was instead the strongest creature. But shouldn't creature include humans, or does it exclude them? Like, is it a branding term for mythic aura? Like, seriously, Mihawk, let's go to him. Is the strongest swordsman, we know that, we've been told a bunch of times. He should be all metrics and defeat all people that have a sword, so does that mean he automatically beats Shanks in every possible fighting scenario, or does it mean that he's the most refined pure swordsman when it comes to sword skills? Or did he just paint his sword black? I don't know, man. It does not make sense looking at it through this lens. If Shanks is a swordsman and Mihawk is the strongest swordsman, then Mihawk should be above Shanks. But Shanks one-shot Kid. Shanks paralyzed Green Bull from miles away by unleashing his sword and pushed him out of his Logia form. His Conqueror's Haki portrayal is overwhelming, breaking like the ship around him as he walks, and is apparently Joy Boy tier. So either Mihawk is a secretly super mega uber demon powerful thing that we haven't seen yet, which, I mean, I guess may be possible, he has the emu eyes, or the title is just very niche specific, or swordsmanship does just not equal pure power. Now I can see, even though you're chewing right now, you want to ask me, what do I think is the most likely option? Well, first off, I hope it tastes well, whatever you're eating right now, but also, I'll give you an answer. Mihawk is the strongest character in all of anime, and he actually will defeat you in real life through the pages of the book if you ever doubt him again. Speaking of which, don't doubt him or me, and subscribe to the Ohara Patreon if you want more fun content like this. I put out my initial thoughts on the chapter there, have a bunch of other premium content, and I'm adding even more pretty cool stuff this year. If you're still watching here, I think you'll love it, or you might be asleep. Do it, or else Mihawk will cut you down through the next manga page. In reality though, One Piece uses titles as myth-making tools for elite tier aura farming, and it does that really well. I'm like, not even saying that's a bad thing. That's it. They don't actually have absolute weight because the next arc needs to have someone stronger for the stakes of anime to keep working. There is a fantastic book by the author of JoJo's where he writes about how to write the perfect shonen, and literally the secret sauce formula that all of them use, including Oda, is stakes always need to go up. Growth always needs to go up. Like, That's the formula, and that is what One Piece is as well. The way I look at it, Luffy is the actual measuring stick for power in the series. He grows like at a crazy fast rate, only outscaled by Kobe if we're being honest, but you know, everything is centered around him. Gear 5 Luffy can easily contend with the Admirals now, but he is not Pirate King yet. But what if Luffy was in the past, but with his current powers? Ooh, a what if video. No, just kidding. But honestly, I do think that he'd make Roger look like Gaimon. Yet somehow, Luffy still is not finished. He still has so much room to grow, still is nowhere near strong enough to actually take on the final, you know, big threats of the story. And narratively, Shanks is positioned as a wall for him, a mentor, but also a hurdle to overcome. Or maybe he'll just be there to refine Luffy's brain, since his will and body are already stronger than Shanks's right now, but still, for a contrived reason like Domi Reversi and the Abyss, Emu is still stronger, and Blackbeard will probably be even stronger than Emu at some point. Because in reality, I would argue that in One Piece, power isn't necessarily strength. It's not how hard you punch, or how hard your will is, or how hard you are. Power is nonsense. It was always and will always be whatever Oda needs it to be for the stakes to still make sense at that point in the story, and it's whatever Luffy does not have. Kaido may represent peak durability and brute force, Whitebeard may have represented peak destructive output, and Mihawk may represent Fate Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works, and Shanks may represent peak Conqueror's pressure, right? But Emu likely does not care about any of these shenanigans, since only Nika, the god angel with mega powers, can actually defeat him, or like the Abyss itself. It's very likely that Emu exists on an ancient, reality-altering tier entirely separate from anything that does exist right now or has existed for the last maybe 1,000 years in One Piece, and so it doesn't matter if Shanks is stronger than Loki, or if either of them is stronger than Luffy right now, or how Zebek and Roger factor in here. All that really matters, I think, is that if Luffy can do it, he's the best at it, and right now he's got to figure out how to be better than Big Demon Mega Dragon Loki. If any of that even matters, because Joy Boy couldn't do it, so how will Luffy? And really, how strong is Joy Boy? What was his plan? Why did it fail? Like, I don't know, but I sure talked a lot about it, and if you want to see my findings, check out this video here, because boy do we need to talk about Joy Boy. Otherwise, thanks for watching. What a fun chapter. Kind of sad there was a break, but a good one for it. And oh, thanks to the Patreons, of course. Really appreciate you guys. And I will see you on Tuesday for a fun video that's even crazier than me power scaling.